our peers and maybe ourselves at times experience, and I mean by our peers, our fellow humans out there in the world, people who exist in the exact same society that we do. Are they experiencing inner emptiness en masse? I would suggest yes. Bored of atomization and lack of direction? I would suggest yes. And there are even very good and even faithful people who are experiencing this because the world is so strange, partly due to our technology. Back to the article. But not so fast. Perhaps AI is really a catacon. That is the argument of Alex Karp and Nicholas Zimiska in The Technological Republic, Hard Power, Soft Belief, and the Future of the West. Karp, a classmate of Thiel's at Stanford, who also studied philosophy and with Thiel founded Palantir Technologies, and Zimiska, his longtime deputy, insist that the enemies of the West will prevail unless software developers work in close collaboration with the American government to produce AI-powered military capabilities superior to that of our adversaries, as Palantir has done using LLMs. That is very interesting. The enemies of the West will prevail unless software developers work in close collaboration with the American government to produce AI-powered military capabilities superior to that of our adversaries, as Palantir has done. The question would then become, who are the enemies of the West? Under the good twin, evil twin paradigm, the enemies of the West is a nonsensical phrase. We are generally to take that to mean the Russians, the Chinese, the Middle East. These are the enemies of the West, we are told. But are they actually the enemies of the West? And then what is the West? And that's a different discussion that we don't need to embrace. But under good twin, evil twin, you only have the top-down, centralized and centralizing control system, or sovereign individuals led by sovereign leaders of sovereign nations, the decentralized model. Okay, there's only those two models. And factions supporting either model exist absolutely everywhere and at different ratios. I would suggest that perhaps the Russian ratio right now of good twin to evil twin factions in the country is higher than ours is. So is it then possible that Russia is an enemy of the West? And if Russia is not the enemy of, quote unquote, the West, which we identify ourselves with for no reason, we're Americans. We're not the West. We're Americans, and we can preserve American culture. We can do that. But in the good twin, evil twin paradigm related to this, it would not then make any sense to ascribe Russia enemy status regarding us if their ratio of good twin to evil twin is higher than ours is. We are actually more of an enemy to them than they are to us. So I don't know exactly what he means here. And if the West is actually Karp and Thiel's identity or identification of the regime, for instance, because the regime does encompass the West and has always encompassed the West, then why would we want them leading the charge to build this sort of weaponry and military capability? They may well be working on behalf of that regime and saying it's to protect the West, but to protect the West, what's the West? Against what? That's the real question. They acknowledge that this will require a massive cultural shift among our technological and cosmopolitan elites who've embraced an ethereal, post-national, and disembodied morality that scorns patriotism, and who've learned that, quote, belief itself in anything other than oneself, perhaps, is dangerous and to be avoided. That may well be true. There are certainly technological and cosmopolitan elites who've embraced those concepts. There are also plenty of people who are not elites or even wannabe elites who have similarly embraced those concepts. Yet it is the market's deployment of advanced technology, including AI, that has above all promoted this, quote unquote, hollowing out of the American mind, the title of the book's second part. Not least by rapidly dissolving social bonds, encouraging pathological self-absorption, and making possible, even incentivizing, digital swarms of doxing and online cancellation. Considered in the context of Karp's and Zimiska's urgent call to arms, the revelation of this contradiction is genuinely apocalyptic. Whether it will accelerate or slow the advent of the Antichrist and the bang or whimper of the world's end depends on our individual and collective capacities to make informed decisions that call for moral courage, capacities that have been eroded by technologically induced oblivion, historical, moral, and metaphysical forgetfulness, and our ingrained habit of ceding direction over our interior lives, the development of our moral selves to the market. Contemplating our predicament, it is hard not to feel discouraged. Well, it's not that hard. Hope alone remains in the Pandora's box of our clever man gods, the Pandora's box our clever man gods have constructed. No, it does not. Hope, without which the understanding, at least for those whose prayers deliver no consolation, would be plagued by the perplexity and fear that have flown therefrom. It's time to take it out of the box and hold it close to our hearts and minds, where it might inspire new growths of wisdom. Now, that is a very, tech curious, tech uncertain article. That person does seem, I would guess that writer is godless, although I'm not obviously entirely sure and would not want to ascribe that to someone. But our only hope does not come in the form of technology that can defeat our enemy's technology, while we identify ourselves as the West and our enemy as that thing that wants to make the Antichrist. Because it seems like if there is a body of individuals, an organization that is simultaneously interested in the Antichrist and is anti-human and doesn't care about the future of humanity, that would seem to be the very regime that we believe the MAGA project is fighting against and that the project worldwide is fighting against. They seem to be the ones most motivated to create that and the ones trying to create a false god of the material realm because they don't have a god. So to help them for a time in that project might not be the right answer, okay? It might just be eschewing that project altogether and pursuing a different project. Now, if that's what we're doing, all good. And if it's being done on our behalf, on the people's behalf, not on behalf of the regimes, the West, that we are meant to identify with, that's really the crux of this issue, as far as I'm concerned. And it is a very interesting and very important issue. All right. LeVar in the Substack chat said, I always lose my mind listening to you, Chris, in a good way. LOL. Well, I hope you don't lose it for very long is all I'm saying. People are, okay, it seems like people are on board with this. All right, okay. Just wanted to make sure nobody was like, this is all crazy. Maybe it is. I don't know. Let us continue with Palantir for a moment. And this article I had more time with. And I hope that means that my highlights have saved, although one highlight, of course, did not. And so now I have to, it tells me how many highlights did not save each time. So now I have to scan the rest of the article. What is that other thing that I had highlighted? So continuing with Palantir. This is the New York Times. Trump taps Palantir to compile data on Americans. So the problem becomes even more important. This is from today. In March, President Trump signed an executive order calling for the federal government to share data across agencies, raising questions over whether he might compile a master list of personal information on Americans that could give him untold surveillance power. That does sound like a concerning issue, except until you remember that the regime already has unrestrained and untold surveillance power. Mr. Trump has not publicly talked about the effort, but behind the scenes, officials have quietly put technological building blocks into place to enable his plan. In particular, they have turned to one company, Palantir, the data analysis and technology firm. The Trump administration has expanded Palantir's work across the federal government in recent months. The company has received more than $113 million in federal government spending since Mr. Trump took office, according to public records, including additional funds from existing contracts, as well as new contracts with DHS and the Pentagon. This does not include a $795 million contract that the Department of Defense awarded the company last week, which has not been spent. So right there, we're talking about not quite, but close to $1 trillion. I mean, it's around $1 billion, around $900 million. So I guess that's not totally out of the ordinary for the Defense Department, et cetera. The push has put a key Palantir product called Foundry into at least 4 federal agencies, including DHS and the Health and Human Services Department. And I am skipping around in this article. Widely adopting Foundry, which organizes and analyzes data, paves the way for Mr. Trump to easily merge information from different agencies, the government officials said. Creating detailed portraits of Americans based on government data is not just a pipe dream. The Trump administration has already sought access to hundreds of data points on citizens and others through government databases, including their bank account numbers, the amount of their student debt, their medical claims, and any disability status. Mr. Trump could potentially use such information to advance his political agenda by policing immigrants and punishing critics. Democrat lawmakers and critics have said. Privacy advocates, student unions, and labor organizations have filed lawsuits to block data access, questioning whether the government could weaponize people's personal information. Okay. All of that sounds like totally legitimate concerns, but these totally legitimate concerns are coming from Democrat lawmakers, Trump admin critics, student unions, and labor rights organizations, in addition to privacy advocates. So those are all very leftist sort of groups. So we have to think, hey, man, maybe there's something wrong with that. And maybe there is. And I think that what's wrong with it is that they have always had the ability to do this. The regime side of things has always had these abilities, working with these same corporations, getting any information they want, and probably with access to that great cloud in the sky where all of everybody's data exists and is analyzed. Does the military have access to that? Do the intelligence agencies have access to that? I would suggest yes to the military and probably to one or more intelligence agencies. And maybe even a better way to look at it is, did they have that access prior to this period, prior to this happening? I would suggest absolutely they had all the access to all of our data. And that companies like Google, who track us in all sorts of ways, companies like Meta, who track us in all sorts of ways, X.com, formerly Twitter, all these companies track us. Any mapping program, any dating app, anything that requires your location settings to be turned on while you're moving around, that means they have all the information on where you are. They know what you're spending every time you're using an app at a grocery store or a Starbucks or whatever else. They know you're there. They know all of these things about us, and they've had access to them the entire time. Is it possible that the Trump administration is trying to build up that same access or strip that access from them in some way and put it in a centralized place that can maybe be fragmented and decentralized? This information is already out there, and it's already being used to control our behavior, to control our consumer spending, to control what we say online. All this stuff is already happening, and it's all automated based on algorithms. All our data is already there. So the privacy advocates, these left-wing organizations that I just described, are upset about a problem that is already affecting all of us, okay? And we can all be upset about the problem. It's right to potentially be upset about that problem. But they're only getting upset about it now because Trump is in charge. And if Trump wasn't in charge, they might still be advocating against these government databases. But I don't know. I guess that maybe we give them the benefit of the doubt on that one, that they just really are privacy advocates. Though I don't know how you get to the situation where we have all of this stuff in the world if privacy advocates were either A, doing anything, or B, cared at all in the first place. And I don't know what the level of caring must have been, but it must have been pretty low if we reached this point. And many of us weren't aware of these problems, or we just avoided or ignored them or figured, well, that's the way it is now. I guess we're all subject to this same thing. I don't know that we are, but let us continue. Palantir's selection as a chief vendor for the project was driven by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. According to the government officials, at least 3 Doge members formerly worked at Palantir, while 2 others had worked at companies funded by Peter Thiel, an investor and founder of Palantir. That's quite interesting. So Elon wants to bring in, this is what we're being told, right? We don't know what the reality is. Elon wants to bring in Palantir. Certain Doge employees are from Palantir. Certain Doge employees worked for Peter Thiel. That sounds like a pretty substantial project. Was that project planned in advance? Yes, of course it was. Was that project already executed in advance? Well, yeah, it might have been. Maybe we're just finding out about what the influence of Palantir is on a delayed timeline. That is entirely possible. We should not suspect that we are getting any of this information ever on the actual timeline. So Elon has this relationship. They've had a relationship for 2 decades or more, of course. PayPal and Silicon Valley Tech, obviously. Maybe Elon is a good guy and actually Trump's good friend and is bringing Peter Thiel in to help, or he's being the narrative delivery system for this Peter Thiel, this quasi Peter Thiel effort, because Thiel's not technically at Palantir anymore right now, just like Bill Gates isn't technically at Microsoft anymore. But Alex Karp is there, and Alex Karp donated, I think it says in this article, to Joe Biden. So all of our information is going to be dominated by these people. Are these the sorts of people who we trust with our information, who we would want dominating our information? Because at some point we have to really get down to these questions, because a lot does ride on how these things will go in the framing we just described. And I don't think that we are doing a good enough job of making sure that aligned interests aren't confused for being on the same path, right? We talked about this back during the Ron DeSantis op. Hopefully the way I described it earlier is understandable. It's possible that they may be the same thing. It's also possible that they might be opposite things advancing together, and that there is a real cost to empowering that opposite thing that may potentially, or even right now, be greater than the benefit we are receiving for the alignment. Okay. And I think it's important that we recognize these dynamics, and the way ultimately to determine these things. I mean, everybody can determine them for themselves, obviously, but I pass everything through the same filter every time intentionally. Is that thing worldly? Is it moral? Right? Those are often 2 totally divergent directions. If something is worldly and we can make a case for it being good in the world, okay, well, that's good. It's better than it being bad. Oh, wait, it can also be bad too. Okay, well, is it moral? Is the foundational principle of what that's doing actually moral? And if we determine that, wait a second, no, it's not moral, well, then we have to look back at the worldly thing and say, you are suspect at best, because you are now asking for our permission and consent to do something in the world that doesn't seem moral, because you're suggesting that it's going to have a good outcome. Now we're talking about a consequentialist morality of the kind we discussed the other day, Sam Harris's Moral Landscape. Okay. You can read many texts on utilitarianism if you want to understand more about that. But we're immediately into the consequentialist realm, which is already kind of outside the bounds of the truly moral. And so when we're making these practical arguments on why doing X, Y, Z is good, even though it's not good, we should be really, really careful about that stuff. And our interests, generally speaking, being aligned with that side of things is probably not a justification to override the moral concerns, in my estimation. Let's get back to the article. Just a couple more bits here. Palantir declined to comment on its work with the Trump administration and pointed to its blog, which details how the company handles data. We act as a data processor, not a data controller, it said. That's a very important distinction. Is it true? We don't know, but it's a very important distinction. Our software and services are used under direction from the organizations that license our products. These organizations define what can and cannot be done with their data. They control the Palantir accounts in which analysis is conducted. Now, the question becomes, is it actually possible to prevent Palantir from seeking in a clandestine way a way to control that data that they are meant to just be processing? And do we have full transparency to know that? Is it possible to know that? Is it possible to make sure that can't happen, that they can't control our data when they are only supposed to be processing? I'm guessing that their control mechanisms on the client side probably can't dictate that in a way that could be fully trusted. Maybe that's just the world we're in. They're giving a proper answer, if that's the true answer, but it's awfully hard to just trust that on, Palantir's word. The White House did not comment on the use of Palantir's technology and referred to Mr. Trump's executive order, which said he wanted to, quote, eliminate information silos and streamline data collection across all agencies to increase government efficiency and save hard-earned taxpayer dollars. Perhaps, okay? Should we believe that the government agencies don't share all the information they have on the American people, not only with one another in a centralized form for the government, for intel, for the military to monitor and use, but their corporate partners as well? I would suggest that they already have all that, and that the idea that data is somehow kept separate in really important ways that defeat the possibility of it being used together to exploit us, that does not seem like a plausible interpretation based on what we have seen from the government over these past few years. Just want to hit, I think, maybe one more thing or two more things. At the IRS, Palantir engineers joined in April to use Foundry to organize data gathered on American taxpayers, two government officials said. Their work began as a way to create a single searchable database for the IRS, but has since expanded, they said. Palantir is in talks for a permanent contract with the IRS, they said. Now, we certainly hope that the IRS won't be around. We expect that it won't be around. Trump has alluded to that numerous times. This is where it gets interesting, though, in regard to what we were just talking about. If it's the case that certain federal agencies are able to keep their data separate from the rest of the government's data, and that was the kind of status quo ante before Trump, what would that mean? Which agencies would be most likely to have that? I would suggest it would be agencies like the IRS and the Fed, who are essentially quasi-governmental organizations under the global regime that exist kind of above the uniparty, if not parallel to it, but are not organizations with full oversight from our government, though they may be now. So if organizations like that had their data cordoned off and now are having it brought into the big picture analysis of what's going on, that's the sort of thing that could trigger this sort of discontent. I was going to say freak out, but maybe it hasn't advanced that far yet. I mean, there was considerable freak out for the whole Doge thing. All that's totally possible. Got to leave those scenarios open. The IRS one would be extremely interesting because being that they are just the collection arm of the Federal Reserve, perhaps they would want to keep their information separate from everyone else's information, and they would not want their information to be seen by an anti-regime actor like Donald Trump and his administration, to the best of our ability to discern.
So there's a bunch of different stories we could go into with this. There's this one, Meta and Anduril partner to develop AI-driven military tech.
Mm-hmm.
We have this story we talked about last night in the Liberty Den of the AI starting to ignore human instructions and actually recoded itself partially. We have this, Trump taps Palantir to compile data on Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should start with this one, because this one to me is like, I feel like they have all this data. They have everything they could possibly want to know about us at their fingertips at any given moment. They already have it
100%,
all.
100%.
So this is like a way they're publicly disclosing and admitting to already having this stuff.
Well, it could just be them trying to like hot potato onto Trump, the thing that they have done. And I think that we can kind of apply that framing broadly to a lot of what we see in these media communications. Just a couple of weeks ago, I don't want to get us off track, but there were a series of articles about a Biden shadow government controlling the auto pen, then a potential shadow government that should be set up right now to counteract the Trump thing. And while they were putting those articles out for the Democrat side, they were also suggesting that Donald Trump has a shadow State Department. And so they want, the projection that they always do. They're going to use that as often as possible. So back to this, though, you're exactly right. Of course, they've had all that data. They've had all that data for the entire time we've been producing data. And somewhere there is a centralized hub where that data will all be captured and analyzed algorithmically and then acted upon. And so that already exists. And they're upset that Palantir is being brought in to work with these. And they say in this article that it's just their software and that their clients using the software have the ability to restrict their access to the information. They're basically saying that there's some kind of pass through. They're not actually controlling the data. And yeah, you shrug. That's the right answer. I mean, that's not the sort of thing that we should just believe from them. But then you have to think about, what does it mean that these different agencies within our federal government are not collating their information and centralizing it in some way, because they're supposedly all parts of the same federal government. But then you go to the Palantir deal with the IRS, and the IRS, are they really part of our government, or are they just bagmen for the Federal Reserve? And in that case, are they not integrated into the rest of the information because they actively want to remain outside that? And so how many agencies would then fit that sort of description, that those agencies are regime only and want no contact whatsoever with a legitimate federal government because they're operating well outside the bounds of the Constitution?
Yeah.
So is it possible that Palantir is just simply coming in under the Trump administration? And all this stuff, again, I would suggest is stuff that probably happened years ago that we're being told about now. But if the regime has all the data and access to all of it and the ability to analyze it, et cetera, through all these levels, well, do we need the same thing or a better thing, obviously, to counteract that? I guess the answer is probably yes. And so is that what we're seeing? And then one last thing, maybe I shouldn't have rattled these all off in a row. I'll save my last thing.
Okay, everybody has regrets, man. So you can keep going.
Well, just the last thing is, I wonder how many of the so the concern is about people's personal data that the government holds, that these various agencies hold. And so I wonder if there's been some reason to keep that data separate over the years, because we know that all of these data entries, all these people who are listed in these federal government databases are assumed to be living people, which is kind of how they've been treated. This is what we've seen over the last few months, but of course, years when it comes to things like election integrity. And so if all these people are considered to be living people in the United States, well, then you can certainly make voter registries for them. And so I wonder if just keeping these databases separate means that any sort of repeats, some duplicates across the system would then not be canceled out at any point, increasing the overall number. I don't know. I'm just thinking of possibilities.
We're at some point going to have to move on from him and have a future. Like, I want a future where we can think for ourselves and the things we want, like my vote actually matters and my impact and things I say online can actually reach everybody with the same opportunity as everybody else. And that stuff actually matters. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And we're not in that reality right now. And I don't see that reality in the future either, based on how things are going. And so how do we get from point A to point B and live in a future where this AI is everywhere and all these things, and the Palantirs and the Peter Thiels of the world and the Elon Musk and all these people that have been foisted upon us as the people that are going to be bringing us this technology and bringing us into this new future where we can just go to whatever planet we want and do all these things and have robots and AI and all these things. We have to put a lot of trust that these people are going to have the best interests of humanity generally in mind. And I don't know any of these guys personally. Like, why am I going to trust Peter Thiel, the guy that's going to have access to all my data and all these other things, Palantir and AI? Like, why am I supposed to trust him when I've never met this guy? But he's being given all this data and access and everything. Like, that's concerning. I have no idea who the hell this guy is and what he believes in. And he's going to be controlling our future, essentially, potentially. That's a concerning thing. And I feel like nobody nobody gives a shit.
Well, yeah,
I mean,
and
nobody,
also he's JD Vance's mentor or whatever. And so, and it's worth reminding people that JD Vance was named as the running mate in the fake campaign leading up to the fake election by Trump in a Truth Social post on July 15th, the Monday, 2 days after the assassination event. 2 days prior to the assassination event, Peter Thiel was at a billionaire confab in Sun Valley, Idaho, in a screaming match against Reid Hoffman of, I guess he's the LinkedIn guy or something, right? And they were in a screaming match over Trump being martyred. So they have that discussion 2 days later, the assassination event. And then 2 days after that, JD Vance is named in a Truth Social post by Trump. So just saying.
Yeah, I think this is after he wished actual martyrdom on Trump, shareholder demands Microsoft remove Reid Hoffman from board.
I can find the
Peter,
original article.
Peter Thiel sarcastically thanked Reid Hoffman for funding lawsuits against Trump because they had turned him into a martyr, increasing his chances of re-election. From the stage, Hoffman shot back with his own sarcastic quip, "Yeah, I wish I had made him an actual martyr." And then 2 days later, that is interesting.
Yeah, and the other element to that would then be if billionaires are having a private meeting in a mountain town, how does a story like this get out? And I would suggest that perhaps the story was placed on purpose. So I don't know. But
yeah, I mean, let's say, you were one of the ones, and you got a lot of flack for this, like your comments and thought process surrounding JD Vance, because you have a very sobering approach to everything. You're very consistent with how you approach things. And most of the time it's right. Like, I would say you're right far more often than you are wrong. And your approach on JD Vance is one of like, maybe this guy isn't a good dude. His connections may not be good ones. And maybe there's a different reason he got selected for VP. And is he just going to be the heir apparent? Like, because a lot of people are treating him as that. And do we have any say in that either? Like, looking at all this guy's connection, like, I don't know, man. Like, that's concerning as well.
Yeah. Yeah. When people immediately do what the television says and then just start incessantly groveling about who the president is going to be in 4 years, something we don't have to know, right? All sorts of people could emerge over the next 3.5 years or whatever it is leading up to that election. The idea that we're just going to choose this guy now because Trump put out a Truth Social post about him. We don't know anything about what he's done as a politician or even really in business. He was a senator for 2 years because Peter Thiel put him in his Senate seat and failed on Blake Masters in Arizona, apparently. Yeah, he was created as a character in the same way that Obama was created as a character. All you have to do is read the first few pages of Hillbilly Elegy, and you can see that A, he didn't write the book, and B, the story is complete and total bullshit. Then it got made into a Hollywood movie, and now for no reason, everybody thinks he's the greatest guy. And actually, I'll say for one reason, the reason is that he talks podcast bro speak to other podcast bros and then mainstream media figures. And so everybody who listens to the Joe Rogans and Dave Rubins and the All In podcast and stuff like that, they're like right on board with everything JD Vance says, even though he doesn't really talk about anything important or have any opinions that are outside of that accepted Republican establishment mainstream or the tech oligarch mainstream.
I need to have AI teach me how to talk podcast, bro. I feel like more people would like me.
Well, the best way to do it is just to listen to all of that relentless dreck and slop all day, every day, like JD Vance's fans do.
That's true. I try not to listen to that stuff. I do think it's interesting, though, like the All In podcast. I don't think I've ever listened to a full episode. I still haven't. Yeah. The episode I was scrolling tonight and I saw David Sachs was on and I saw the topic was AI. And it's like, you know what? This guy is in the inner circle of Trump's administration. He's been given the reins essentially for this. Let's hear what he has to say about it. And that stuff is significant because if we're to believe his role and his position and what Trump has given him, he is going to dictate the future of AI and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and stuff in this country as far as, you know, Trump allows him to. And he's friends with all of these people too, which that's kind of a conflict of interest.
And PayPal Mafia as well.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
So you got Sachs, Elon, and Thiel right in there. I'm going to pull up the list of all these guys.
Yeah. Elon Musk, though, he's no longer with us. Trump wrote his eulogy on Truth Social the other night, and he's no longer a special government employee. May he be remembered. And by the way, that like we talked about this on Wednesday. I've talked about this a lot. I don't know if I've brought this question up with you, but I was extremely underwhelmed by Doge and the amount of fraud, waste, and abuse that we are eventually going to get fixed here, with 9.4 billion maybe being codified. Maybe they haven't even brought the bill to the floor yet. Just a little underwhelming.
Yeah. I guess for the most part, I agree with you. I always, and said this back in November, I didn't think that Doge was anything more than public communications and disclosure operation.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is they did. I guess we'll find out in the future, I hope. Maybe they're just in there getting all of the election information. Maybe they're compiling all the data with Palantir systems. I have no idea what they're doing. 3 Doge employees used to work at Palantir, and a couple other guys at one of Thiel's other companies, I think. The influence, it's all tied in together as the same thing. And all of that was initially started by government agencies. So at some point, all that's going to have to be reconciled. And I don't suggest I know exactly how that's going to go, but man, the problem is, the reason that I take so many of these viewpoints is because I think that they're valid viewpoints that aren't being expressed, because everybody is still like, no matter how much people say they don't watch the mainstream media, don't watch TV or whatever, if you are assuming the exact positions consistently that the television is suggesting you assume, then whether or not you're watching TV to get those positions is irrelevant, because you're ending up in the same place downstream from those, right? Joe Rogan or Dave Rubin or whoever these people are, they are downstream from the mainstream media. They believe that everything that's happening in the mainstream media is real, that the news is telling us some version of the truth, or that the truth can somehow be extracted from it. None of that is required. And to actually get outside of that, all that stuff starts vanishing. It makes no sense whatsoever. And if we all are adopting these positions all the time and then enforcing it through like this struggle session consensus that we've somehow developed in the truth community, where like, if you say something else, oh, that guy's a traitor. Really? How come no one else is saying these things? Since it's clear that it's possible, and we don't really have any proof whatsoever that this guy and this guy and this guy are all actually secret white hats and good guys, maybe we should actually be a little critical about what they're doing. All right, so let's leave that. Let's leave that to the side. Who knows when we will talk about clones and doubles and soulless, mindless entities again. Oh, wait. Speaking of Palantir, just kidding. Robotic engineered, soulless, mindless entities. Kind of aligns with Palantir a little bit. So we talked about Palantir on Friday, and the New York Times article about how the Trump administration was pursuing contracts with Palantir so that their tech, their software, their programs, their systems, however you want to describe it, are going to be implemented in various parts of the federal government, including the IRS, which isn't really part of the federal government. Okay. So IRS data was going to be brought into the centralized data holdings of the federal government. They also had mentioned DHS. Is DHS part of the federal government? Well, we're certainly told that it is. It was implemented after a false flag attack, which is not to say that the buildings didn't come down, but certainly after a false flag attack about which we were lied to in infinite ways. Okay. And they have offices all over the world, which is strange if their focus is on homeland security. And it seems as though they are actually interested in protecting, as the homeland, the entirety of the global regime and its proxy states. That is how I perceive the DHS. And so we can look at some of these organizations and see which ones of them are kind of set up outside the reality prime base layer government that we are supposed to have, that would be accountable to the original Constitution. So immediately right there, you have to wonder about the Palantir data. What data are they going to have access to? Is it data that the regime was able to cordon off prior to this period, to, during Trump's first term? Perhaps Trump's people were not able to gain full and proper access to IRS databases and some of these other databases. And why would you want to have these databases separate with personal identifying information on all Americans in all these databases? Well, then duplicates don't get scrubbed. The redundancies are not eliminated, which ends up recording a lot more people in the United States than probably exist. And we've seen at least we've been told that there is evidence of that pattern throughout the Doge discoveries. Okay, so that's possible. And then, if you have extra people, you can use them as the input product for election fraud, for voter registries, and those eventually lead to fake ballots in fake elections. So there's all sorts of reasons why that information should be collated and combined in one storage apparatus for the government. It's all government information. And we're supposed to be upset that all that information is going to be centralized. Or are we supposed to be upset that there's a private company involved in doing it? Now, again, if you've listened to my show for any duration, you'll understand that I am extremely skeptical about Peter Thiel, about Alex Karp, the current CEO of Palantir, Peter Thiel's co-founder, and about Palantir and Anduril themselves. Okay. I'm skeptical. We'll talk in a minute about Peter Thiel's kind of philosophical mind to the extent that I'm aware of it, right? Which is admittedly not an expert, but with some awareness. And the JD Vance connection to the fact that JD Vance was Peter Thiel's guy, and JD Vance is now at least seen to be the vice president of the United States. So all these are significant concerns. At the same time, we know that the regime was already combining all of our data, analyzing all of our data, our biometrics, our health records, our banking records, our calls, our locations, our messages, the things we typed and didn't send. They have all that, and they use it to exploit us. They use it to change our beliefs and change our buying habits. That was already happening, okay? So in a situation where that was already happening, how is it that our government doesn't have access to it? That's a question that we have to ask. Wouldn't the government be the central hub of something like that? Considering even that Defense Department contractors are the tech companies with the infrastructure to actually contain that amount of data, Amazon Web Services, for instance, okay? So we have Defense Department contractors. We have the Defense Department itself, intelligence agencies, okay? We would assume that some combination of those things would be operating a system like that and then controlling a system like that, which would indicate in a normal world, the one that we were indoctrinated to believe was real, to the extent that, our real world is not normal and our normal world is not real. But in that world, we would expect that the government would have control over all of those entities and therefore control over those databases. Why wouldn't they have that? Why wouldn't it be centralized? Well, we heard Dominic Cummings talking the other day about how the deep level of the deep state, whether it's black hats or white hats, we don't know, but the deep level of the deep state is preventing any insight or oversight from the parts of the government. So somehow they've cordoned off their information, their plans, their agendas, their operations from the so-called elected government, okay? And it would make sense either in the worst case deep state scenario or in the best case Trump and military scenario that these things would be separated. The regime, looking at everything through good twin, evil twin, the regime would not want the good twin to possess all of its technology and information. And I've suggested many times that the takeover of Twitter, the shifts in Twitter are some indication of an operation like that happening. Okay. So we have this centralized database that's algorithmically analyzed and then deployed to exploit us and guide our behaviors. Okay. And then we have these parts of government that are somehow outside of our normal constitutional form. And those parts of government were not sharing data with whatever the good twin government faction has access to. And so Palantir is being brought in to reacquire that access into that centralized hub underneath the Trump administration and the federal government. So we can talk more deeply about privacy issues. I know that that's a concern, but I think that ship has already sailed. We can talk about constitutional issues. That ship's probably already sailed too. Okay. And so when you wipe that aside, because it probably should be set aside, what's left is morality and practicality, the godly and the worldly, as always. Okay. So with that in mind, what's going on here and who is the most upset about it? So let's return to the Palantir conversation. I want to share this first. This was printed in many of the articles. The New York Times mentioned it. It goes a little further here in this article from Guru Focus, reprinted by Yahoo News. But just down here to the end, hold for processing. Still, not everyone's cheering. Inside Palantir, dissent is brewing. 13 former employees recently signed an open letter opposing the company's deepening role under Trump, citing risks of surveillance overreach and reputational blowback. This is a red line I won't redraw, said Brianna Catherine Martin, a departing strategist. Engineers have raised concerns about the aggregation of sensitive data and sloppy security practices from some government users. Palantir insists it acts purely as a data processor under client direction, but the scale and sensitivity of the work has sparked internal debates about how far is too far. Investors for now seem focused on the upside, but the longer-term consequences could be harder to quantify. Okay, and so that's primarily reframed within a financial point of view. But the point that I want to focus on is the departing engineer and what her take is and why she's being so widely cited. This is something that we can observe in media all the time. When they want to make something look bad, they find a person who's quote unquote on the inside, and that person tells them something really bad is going on in the background and it's being kept a secret from all you. I'm going to finally admit this. I'm going to be a whistleblower. She's not a whistleblower. Okay. So let's look at this. Let's look at her post. She originally posted this on LinkedIn, and Bay Theater Dave in the chat just said, remember to thumbs up. Every thumbs up recharges Chris's AI processor. That is true. I am one of those robotic engineered entities. I hope that I'm not soulless or mindless, though. I also was not actually robotically engineered. You know, I guess you need to say all these things at this point. So let's look at Catherine Martin's LinkedIn post. She says, today was my last day at Palantir. After much consideration, I decided to resign in light of the expansion of work with ICE under this administration. Well, that's interesting. So they weren't working with ICE before. Now, if there's one thing we know about Palantir, it's that they can track the shit out of anybody. And so when it comes to illegal aliens, do you want them to be tracked? A lot of people would say yes, because we need to get them out of our country. Or immigration is being used as the front to increase the security state within the United States of America. And everybody should be concerned about this stuff, okay? It's not about going after Trump for doing this either way. What's critical is understanding what work is going to be done and what influence Palantir actually has. Maybe they have a lot of influence as a quote unquote private company, or maybe they have very little influence as a defense contractor, a government contractor, overseen by probably elements of the military and elements of the intelligence community. So are there good people in that system running all of this? It's possible, but we don't know it to be true. So we have to look at both sides. Let's continue with this. I've always worked in fields with a degree of moral ambiguity and think of it as a necessary companion to meaningful work. Okay, Brianna, you sound insane. Implementing humanitarian aid programs required a constant redrawing of ethical red lines and a healthy dose of relativism. Implementing humanitarian aid programs requires you to be morally relativist and redraw ethical lines. For most of my time here, I found the way that Palantir grappled with the weight of our capabilities to be refreshing, transparent, and conscionable. This has changed for me over the past few months. I admire my colleagues who continue to do good work and interrogate its impact, including far future ripple effects that I may not be seeing. But for me, this is a red line I won't redraw. So the work Palantir has done in the past was conscionable, refreshing, and transparent in the eyes of Breonna Martin. But the work that Palantir is going to embark on under the Trump administration is not refreshing, not transparent, and it is unconscionable. And therefore, she has to leave. Well, what was the change? Was it what the company was doing? Was it what the company's capabilities were? Or was it that Donald Trump is in charge now? And it would seem like it's that Trump is in charge. This is not the note I wanted to leave things on, she says. I'm saddened to leave the best, most brilliant, funniest, hardworking, and most adaptive colleagues I've ever had. I'm frustrated to leave capture efforts in mid-swing. I am so grateful to my colleagues for the time we spent working together on real-world problems, nuclear security, and HIV/AIDS response that lit us up through the late nights and surges. I'm going to miss you all a lot. But put bluntly, with the erosion of due process and institutions, this is not the time to erect a Maginot line of justifications based on comfort and compliance. It feels wrong. If it feels wrong to you, it probably is. So we are being told that due process and our institutions are being eroded under Donald Trump. Is due process being eroded? No. Due process is being challenged and litigated, not only in courts, but in the court of public opinion, and then ultimately by the president, if he so chooses, which is well within his constitutional rights. So I don't believe that due process is being thwarted. And I'm not of the belief that illegal aliens require due process. We can be compassionate and understanding. And however open to their side of the story we can possibly be, but that doesn't then mean that they have the right to due process when they are here illegally, when their presence already constitutes a violation of law. And Stephen Miller, in his interview with Laura Trump over the weekend that I listened to earlier today, he talks about how there is not just this set of rights for illegal aliens, and also that being sent back to your country, being deported, is not a punishment. It is just what the law requires. So as far as the institutions being eroded under Donald Trump, well, institutions are being eliminated. Perhaps your very important nuclear security and AIDS projects. We got nuclear existential threat, pandemic existential threat, both wrapped up in one. Palantir working on them. Where was the money coming from? USAID? I don't know that to be true, but I'm sure that we could probably trace it back there, considering these projects and the fact that she's talking about humanitarian aid. So this woman believed that she was doing humanitarian aid work and maybe some tech work too at this. She was an engineer, I think, that we've been told. So yeah, it actually says in her bio right there, humanitarian aid plus tech crossover. Okay. So she is on the global regime side of things, and the most corrupt part of the global regime side of things may well be their so-called humanitarian aid and their foreign aid and all of these ridiculous projects that they devote all the time, money, and energy to, that are probably really in service of a different part of the agenda. The idea of nuclear security and the idea of helping people not die from HIV and AIDS is probably cover for something else. Well, let's continue with these Palantir reactions, because it wasn't only the people inside Palantir and the people on the quote unquote left, but really the uniparty, who were upset about this. And we might see right here some uniparty right. This is from Newsweek. This is just from today. Trump flipped on us. MAGA reacts to potential national citizen database. Does MAGA react, or did they find some questionable influencers to react? And you can judge this for yourself. Okay, so we understand the backstory here, and let's look at some of the responses. Numerous pro-Trump voices expressed dismay and feelings of betrayal across social media platforms like X. People are so quick to suggest that I flipped on Trump. No, I didn't flip on Trump. Trump flipped on us. I'm just not willing to continue living in a lie, and I will tell you the unfortunate truth about it. The Patriot Voice wrote on X to his 158,000 followers. The Hodge twins, popular conservatives and Trump supporters, have more than 3.3 million followers on X. In response to the New York Times report, they wrote on May 30th, "Hope this ain't true, y'all." Another post that same day reads, "Don't know if this is true, but I did not vote for this." Okay, well, you kind of did. Also, elections are fake, and who you voted for doesn't matter. Just say you think it's immoral. But then again, do you actually know that? Because I would bet my life. Well, I shouldn't say that. I would bet a great deal that these people have not gone deeply into these issues. Nick Fuentes, a far-right Trump supporter, described it as an America First white nationalist. Yet, that's what he describes himself as. Called the association between the Trump administration and Palantir, quote, the ultimate betrayal of his own people. Feeding every MAGA extremist into an AI database controlled by a CIA Mossad cutout, Fuentes said on X, where he has 561,000 followers. Seriously, if Palantir isn't the deep state, then what is? And Palantir might be the deep state, or it might have been the deep state. What matters is what it's doing now. He says in a video recorded, Fuentes says they are tracking everybody that criticized Israel, everybody that interacts with somebody that's criticizing Israel, and whether you're on a visa or not, whether you're a citizen or not, whether you're brown or not, Christian or Muslim, they're putting you in the Palantir database. They're putting you on the enemies list. If you don't see a problem with that, and then it's just ... So Jack Maxey was MAGA, a giant psyop. I don't know who some of these other accounts are at all and don't really care very much. An activist named Jason Bassler said, no, this Palantir database isn't like others. It will combine tax filings, student debt, Social Security, bank accounts, medical claims, immigration status, and then wrote, no previous database system has ever centralized this much personal info across various federal agencies. And the question then would be, back to what we were talking about before, why hasn't it been? Why haven't those databases been combined? And there is some reason, at least, to believe that these things are specifically regime projects. Student debt to pay for these colleges, federal government funding of colleges and universities is a regime agenda item. Taxes, IRS, and the Fed, regime. Social Security, regime. Bank accounts, I guess insofar as it's dealing with the IRS and the Fed, that would be on that side. Same thing with the medical claims. You could go either way on that. Immigration status, same thing. Okay. So those are all agencies that could have been separate from whatever centralized government database might exist or might have existed prior. Okay. We don't know ultimately how that situation worked. There's not transparency to these levels. And that makes our work really difficult. And we can dig and dig and dig and maybe make some headway. And I haven't done that yet. So maybe it's to go on the to-do list. I would like to understand firmly how these systems operate, but we can kind of understand the motivations behind the various parties and what they might have access to. Okay. And I would suggest the global regime had access to all of the information, all of it. Why would they prevent access they needed through their own representatives, through their own servants, right? They don't have people at the IRS who could get them all the data they needed. Give me a break. Same thing with these other subjects. Of course they can get that information. And of course they had that information. It would be crazy to believe that they didn't have all that information combined in one place that they could analyze. So I would have to suggest that to the extent they kept this information outside of what would be under the purview of the Donald Trump run federal government, it could be brought in right now. One other comment I want to read from this article, Justin Amash, who was one of the Freedom Caucus guys. He called himself a libertarian. Who were his buddies? Thomas Massey was one of his good buddies. And then he had another good buddy. I can't remember who it was. But Justin Amash is a Trump-hating cuck and has been. And that's why he's not in Congress anymore, because he got bounced early on in the Trump era. The surveillance state, the police state, the deep state are alive and well under Trump, Amash says. He signed bills to extend and expand mass surveillance. Now he's building profiles on millions of law-abiding Americans. It's an extraordinary threat to liberty. And, I can't disagree with the underlying concern. I just am a bit surprised that it is so important to all of these particular people now that Trump is the president. That indicates that there has been some sort of change in their thinking. Now, Amash has been pretty consistent with that kind of stuff, so I can't justifiably ding him on that one. But he's also been a constant Trump hater, and now all of this is a crisis. Did these companies have access before? They probably did. And on some level, if we want the sort of accountability that many of us seek, additional access to information is probably going to be required at some point. And so, again, I would suggest that this problem is probably already baked in and that we've probably actually been victimized by this problem quite a lot. So the fear that Amash is expressing, the scary thing has already happened, as is true with many of these issues. And the benefit from something like that, to the extent that there is a morally justifiable benefit, and people can have different opinions about that, but that benefit would not have accrued yet. So we would have all of the scary thing having already happened and none of the benefit. And so we will see if that changes under the new Trump administration. Now, Palantir, this is Alex Karp. These videos burst online this morning. They were at some sort of conference, and I'll find out while the video plays.
Hey, Gio. Gio. Behind me.
All right. How wonderful, Mr. Secretary, to live in a country where people are allowed to speak their mind, ask questions of their governments, because in fact, the adversaries we're up against, whether they're the genocidal communists in Beijing or the Salafi jihadists in the Middle East.
All right, so we'll let that go. I mean, it's annoying to listen to those clips. So for audio people, apologies. They were saying that genocide is not innovation. Of course, all the things that they're always saying, and Palantir is the problem in this instance. I'm not a defender of Palantir. Everybody knows that. But you also got to be even-handed with these things. It might just be that they're being signed up to do good work, having done bad work before. There's a lot of companies that could be described that way. So this event was, those were Code Pink protesters, and the banner said, Palantir kills in Gaza, surveils at home. The talk was between the Secretary of the Navy and Palantir's head of defense. And so I'm gonna have to watch this talk. But I misspoke earlier. I said it was Alex Karp. Here's one more video from that event.
Figure out how, if I really want to bring about change and bring about a more adaptable culture.
All right. And so then we get around to back where we were initially. So she just said that Palantir's AI is responsible for the killing of 50,000 people in Gaza. That sounds ridiculous. I'm not saying it's not possible. I guess you can create a scenario where it would be possible, but it sounds ridiculous. So Code Pink is protesting this deal with Palantir. The leftists, the humanitarians within Palantir are protesting this Trump Palantir deal. And so-called MAGA, mainstream, terminally online influencers are also against this Palantir and Trump deal. That's a strange collection of people. why would all of these people be against this deal? Well, it must damage the Uniparty and the regime's interests. Otherwise, I can't imagine they would be against it. It's just a bridge too far to think that all of these people are fully informed about these issues and know what's actually going on. It's impossible to believe that. So are they all just expressing their deep moral convictions about privacy? Seems like something else is going on, man. I don't trust anything like that. And with that display by Code Pink, now I know that PSYOPs can work in both directions, right? If you want to manufacture consent, if you want to manufacture belief from our side, from our point of view on what Palantir is doing, you would have Code Pink protest them. But again, it's not just Code Pink. It's a lot of people going anti-Trump on this. And I guess we'll see in the future if it's justified. I don't know how that's going to turn out. And, as I said Friday, it could be the case that Trump is operating in coordination with people with whom his interests and the interests of the American people are aligned for a time, and then they will be cast aside. Do we need Palantir in a real way as their private company if, in fact, the company was started with government funds in a person who was directed by government and doing government work for the entire time? Do we need Palantir's permission, or is it just their technology? And is the massive deal about more than just business? I think it's at least worth examining whether or not those are possibilities. Now, within the whole Peter Thiel milieu, we've talked many times about Curtis Yarvin. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I was surprised to see Yarvin on the front page of CNN over the weekend, because CNN is not the sort of place I would expect to be promoting Curtis Yarvin. And it's impossible to think of a CNN report as anything other than publicity. Now, maybe they're publicizing his viewpoint for good reasons. They're just trying to open up a conversation within the mainstream. It's entirely possible. It's also possible that CNN just has an active interest in supporting a Curtis Yarvin-oriented philosophy, probably somewhere downstream from that kind of tech oligarchy that would then control or have seized control of the Republican establishment and characters like J.D. Vance. Okay. So we got to consider it both ways. I don't think that CNN pumping Curtis Yarvin on their main page is some kind of mistake. Yarvin's also been doing pretty substantial events over the past few weeks. One of the debates is mentioned here in the piece, but let's just cut to the video. Here we are.
Hi. Hadas. Nice to meet you. Thanks so much for doing this.
Meet the man inspiring the next generation of MAGA, Curtis Yarvin, who thinks America should no longer be a democracy. Even before Trump's re-election, he envisioned a fantasy world where Trump was president again, and with chilling accuracy described how he would take aim at public and private institutions without any interference from Congress or the courts.
Obviously, I'm not the secret mastermind of the Trump-Vance administration.
You're not? I thought there was a hotline.
The software engineer and blogger has been called the father of dark enlightenment political theory. That means he thinks democracy is overrated, and what the U.S. needs is a king.
A monarch, a single focus of authority is, absolutely necessary to run any integrated system efficiently. You could probably put any of the Fortune 500 CEOs in and say, okay, you're in charge of the executive branch, fix this. They'd probably do fine. They wouldn't be Hitler or Stalin.
And he's got some powerful people listening.
I think you're pretty far out in a way that is worth thinking about. There's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things.
Years before Elon Musk and Doge, Yarvin coined the phrase RAGE, retire all government employees. Next, he sees a world where the power is not with the people.
Should there be, though, elections in your world of a sovereign CEO?
There needs to be a way of basically holding the sovereign CEO accountable.
But not every single person should have a vote.
I have 4 beautiful children. None of them have a vote.
Experts in democracy, like Harvard professor Daniel Allen, who publicly debated Yarvin, say his ideas are dangerous.
It is not the case that autocracies over the course of history have delivered good for human beings. They have consistently violated freedom.
Not surprisingly, Yarvin is no stranger to controversy. He's been accused of using racist tropes and whitewashing history.
Certain races are better at certain things than others.
Do you not necessarily believe then that certain races would be better at governing a country than others?
Oh, I mean, again, governing a country is just a skill. And, it's like the British in India would basically say, oh, this race is a governing race, this race is not a governing race, based on culture, based on tradition, based on biology.
So you're saying, yes, certain races would be better at running governments than others.
Would be better at doing anything, but those are only averages.
As for Trump, Yarvin says the administration is still not going far enough in harnessing executive power.
You laid out how you thought things could be done in a way that were fast, that may be a little bit dirty, and some of the things they do seem to be doing there in the White House. Are you not pleased with how they're doing it?
No, because I think that if you basically take anything complicated and you try to do 10% of it, you're not going to 5% or maybe 1%. You're probably not going to result in anything good.
Instead, Yarvin is looking to younger generations.
I think most of my influence on sort of the Trump administration is less through the leadership and more through like kids in the administration who read my kind of stuff because my audience is very young. And
are you in touch with staffers at the White House on a regular basis?
I don't really know what a regular basis is, but
are you emailing on the phone
are there people in the administration who are on signal groups with me? Yes, there are. I'm just out there in the marketplace of ideas, and I think the marketplace of ideas has definitely expanded in the last 10 years.
All right. So he's on signal group chats with members of the administration, and one can assume that one of those members is J.D. Vance. I think that that's probably likely. So that's Curtis Yarvin. Now, there's nothing to what he says, okay? Curtis Yarvin, for the problems I have with him, is an intelligent guy. He's very clever, at least. He's crafty in what he's doing. He's talking about the monarch as like the chief executive of everything. There needs to be one node that is the ultimate decider. And that would be closer to the case if we just had the original Constitution. Okay. So, and there were concerns about whether or not the president was too close to a monarch back then. And of course, we've been raised to believe that a monarchy is the worst possible thing. In fact, our country was founded to get rid of monarchy. It's important to remember that our country was founded to get rid of a foreign monarchy, okay? And that our country was founded on preserving personal liberty. But the idea that monarchy is necessarily bad, well, that can't just be the case. It's got to be bad relative to something or good relative to something. In France, what replaced the monarchy was head chopping communists and then eventually an emperor. So I don't know if monarchy is a solution, but the president, as it was initially designed, the presidency, as it was initially designed, would be a central node that could make sure that the agenda was implemented in one direction. I think that we already have the possibility to satisfy the goals Yarvin has within the framework of the original Constitution. And if not, we can scale back further from there. That's my preference, okay, rather than going straight to monarchy. But the other thing about Curtis Yarvin is that he doesn't want massive nation states either. He wants a patchwork of different governments in different locations. And that's very much in line with the sovereign individual and the stuff that Peter Thiel talks about. Again, Peter Thiel wrote the foreword to the recent edition, I think it was the 2018 edition of The Sovereign Individual. Okay, so he's along these lines. We're talking about these little city states that would be ruled by their own monarchs, and people would choose to live there, always with the possibility for exit. I don't know how you guarantee that, as I've said before, but they would basically just pay taxes as a subscription to that society that they wanted to live in. So in the chat, EC was here, said, let me find it. Where is it? Sorry. Hold for processing. Chat is hopping right now. He said, if he, being Yarvin, thinks one can have a monarch without an aristocracy, then he's a chump. Well, yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with that. I would suggest that Yarvin would agree with that too. I don't think that he's claiming the aristocracy wouldn't follow. I think he anticipates the aristocracy and believes that the aristocracy should be allowed to do what it wants. And that's when these sorts of situations become more dangerous in the way we might conceive of them if applied broadly across society. So if Peter Thiel wanted to take a few 100,000 acres somewhere, right? I mean, Jeff Bezos, he bought a few, I think over 100,000 acres for his corn ranch in West Texas. It's a lot of land. Could he build out an entire society there that would be based on the needs of people who really loved Amazon? And he could have his own sort of whatever experience he wanted, right? He could have his ridiculous yacht with his plastic wife and have parties with people like that all the time and just have celebrities live there or whatever. And he has his own massive Amazon commune, the state of Bezos. In Yarvin's system, that's the sort of thing that would be happening. Okay. And then, of course, you'd have private security within that tiny city state or nation state or whatever it would be. Right. So all of those things would be possible. And if you eliminate the aristocracy, the oligarchy from that picture, then all we have is just kind of the fragmented societies with much smaller nation states that we used to have many hundreds of years ago in Europe. So I don't know. I don't think that the notion is all that crazy, but I'm also not sold on Yarvin's picture of it or his reasons for wanting it. And because of the associations and because of the concerns I have about how he perceives things, I would not be inclined to go along with him. That said, he's given partial credit for the quote unquote dark enlightenment. Nick Land is given credit for the dark enlightenment just the same. It's the two of them, basically. I'm a big fan of Nick Land and not a fan at all of Curtis Yarvin. So I don't know where that leaves me. I want to show one other video just quickly. This is a conversation that I watched between some British host and Curtis Yarvin on the outlet Unheard. This was from, says 8 months ago, September 6th of last year. Okay. So I just want to share a couple of minutes of this where Curtis Yarvin goes through what he believes happened during the very deadly pandemic and what the role of science and government was in causing it.
The effect of SARS-1 on the virology community was to do something. When you do science, and I used to be a grad student in computer science, and sort of this, it was a very long time ago, but I was sort of creeped out by this way of doing things. When you do science today, basically science is funded by grants. And when you write a grant proposal, you are saying to the government, here is a problem that is important to society, and I'm going to solve it. Such as the problem of the emergence of bat coronaviruses into the human population. We know it's a problem. We saw it happen. Hundreds of people were killed by SARS, bad disease. Okay, real problem. How would we solve this problem? Well,
let's just pause there. Okay. So SARS-1 was zoonotic. It came from the animal population and affected humans. So we know that can happen. Curtis Yarvin says it can happen. Okay. And we know that there were a couple hundred deaths from SARS. We know that somehow. Tests or something. Or just likely SARS. Or maybe they just use statistics to create the reality of a problem that has no reality. So I would already say, Yarvin, you don't know any of these things. I know that that's what the medical history says, but we just watched all the people who compiled that history lie about what was going on in 2020. So why would you believe them from years earlier? It makes no sense. And he never confronts issues like that, as far as I know. And his body of work is massive. So I cannot pretend to have even sliced off a fraction of that at this point, a substantial fraction. But I have never seen it. And the fact that he still talks like this means he hasn't contended with that problem. Let's continue.
We would investigate, we're just abstract knowledge. We were going to investigate the possibility that another bat coronavirus will emerge. There was a grant. They use these acronyms like acronyms of names. It was called the PREDICT grant. We're going to predict the emergence of bat coronaviruses. Not really sure what you were going to do with it when you predicted it, but we're going to predict it. How are we going to predict it? Well, the first step is to go and sample all the bat coronaviruses. And there's a funny story in there, which is, does anyone know the name Gerald Durrell? Lawrence Durrell?
Oh, yeah, as in My Family and Other Animals.
Exactly. I was a huge fan as a kid of Gerald Durrell books because I spent some time in the Commonwealth and those books were everywhere. And great writer, great books. And Gerald Durrell basically was a zoologist, and his specialty was going to little decaying pieces of the British Empire and finding cute, fuzzy, cuddly little animals and bringing them home in cages and breeding them in the zoo he established. And he established an organization called the Wildlife Trust, which was basically in the business of doing this. Okay, I love cute, fuzzy little animals, but they're not a problem. They're not relevant. We're not going to be attacked by bush babies, tomorrow. But what we are going to be attacked by is bad coronaviruses. So actually, someone who would work for the Wildlife Trust realized that there was a richer source of grants elsewhere. His name was Peter Daszak. And Mr. Daszak, Dr. Daszak, I believe, turned the Wildlife Trust into an organization called EcoHealth Alliance. And EcoHealth Alliance was like, okay, our zoologists are going to go into the field. And instead of collecting cute, fuzzy little bats, they're just going to get the bat viruses. And we're going to go to all these bat caves and get all the bat viruses. And we're going to subcontract this work to China because it's cheap and they're right there in bat country. And
I'm not sure this is what he had in mind when he was doing My Family and Other Animals.
I'm not sure this is what he had in mind when he was doing My Family and Other Animals. I think he might be a little shocked. Now, the thing is, you can go and collect all these bad coronaviruses, but there's a problem, which is that they're bad viruses. They don't naturally affect people. They don't naturally jump to people. They don't naturally emerge. What they have to do to emerge is to mutate. Okay, things mutate. DNA makes little mistakes but the thing is, that's a random and slow process. So if you're going to predict how these things are going to mutate, if you're going to analyze the possibility that they're going to mutate and become human viruses, well, you could just mutate them yourselves. And you might say, for example, what if a bad coronavirus developed a furin cleavage site so that it could become much more effective at infecting humans? We could basically engineer a furin cleavage site into this bad coronavirus, and we could infect humanized mice with this. And we know that this research was proposed. We don't know whether it was done, but it was essentially a recipe for COVID. And if COVID, maybe it wasn't caused COVID, maybe it was a bad coronavirus that just emerged in the same place at the same time in the same way as this research. But it's possible, but the thing is, it's like, well, maybe you clubbed your ex-wife on the head. Maybe you just swung a club at her and she fell down the stairs and broke her head. But you shouldn't have been doing that, And
it's not very relaxing how you're laughing in that.
So, well, we all have exes, but
I mean, I say some ums. Don't get me wrong, but I try to not do the and thing constantly, but he does. So anyhow, his take on what happened with the very deadly pandemic is retarded. Okay. So I get that he believes in the lab leak theory, and I suppose that that's better than its controlled opposition dynamic alternative, which was the official story within the central narrative about it emerging in a wet market and infecting humans. And we've had this naturally occurring virus, and now it's killing everybody everywhere. Well, alternative to that, we have the lab leak theory. They were studying this, Peter Daszak, EcoHealth, gain of function research. That virus got out or was released on purpose or was intentionally infected into somebody. And then we had a real pandemic. No, we did not have a real pandemic. Okay. People were not dying in the streets at any point. There were deaths caused by the hospital protocol among people who were already of a significant age and had other significant health concerns. Every COVID death was either medical malpractice or data malpractice. Okay. There's no test that shows COVID. Therefore, you cannot say that we had a pandemic, especially when the people who are said to have died from COVID died from a medical protocol that we know can kill them. Okay. So to think that the lab leak explains a real pandemic is to already accept the notion that we had a real pandemic, and we did not have a real pandemic. And you can't prove that by the statistics of the same people who lie about everything else. So there are logical problems and epistemological problems in Yarvin's mode of thought when it comes to the coronavirus that infect everything else he writes. Constant references to the central narrative about World War II and other historical events. He actually, interestingly, because I don't hate the man. I just think he's really overrated, and his ideas aren't nearly as good as powerful people think his ideas are. Okay. He did bring up Chernobyl as an example of when a nation's entire reason for being is called into question and refuted by a disaster of a certain magnitude. Now, the problem is, because I think that this is a very relevant comparison to what happened with the coronavirus, because I think that we had institutions, systems of government totally refuted by that entire experience. Yarvin is playing it up so that the new way can be ushered in. That's very much in line with the Great Reset. To not understand Yarvin as being palatable to those on both sides, quote unquote, of the uniparty tech divide when it comes to the pursuit of the Great Reset is to make a mistake. He's right in there, right on board with it. So he says COVID refutes our government's modus operandi, okay? The same way that Chernobyl refuted the Soviet modus operandi of the time. That was supposed to be the thing that told us, well, this system of government just doesn't work. And they even did a great HBO series on Chernobyl in 2019 or maybe even 2020, or at least that's when it was broadcast. Fantastic series, but reaffirms the official story and then also throws in, oh yeah, there's actually magnificent animal wildlife there. And the things that we said about these nuclear disasters and how they would poison everything forever. Oh, it turns out that's not true. So that's it. That is in there. But the point is, to make his point, you have to accept the official story within the central narrative about Chernobyl and about the whole Fauci thing. Okay? Because if you understand both of those to be these tragedies that were probably caused on purpose and then exploited for whatever reason, both situations take on entirely different implications. And, you know, he doesn't, to my experience with Yarvin's work, I have never seen him wrestle with these kinds of problems. He believes that there is a counter narrative to most of history. And then he just, again, decides within that controlled opposition dynamic, what stuff in the middle works for him. And that, I think, is a spectacular intellectual failure that our elites and wannabe elites will continue making maybe until the end of days. And Curtis Yarvin is certainly one of those. I've said before, he is the scientific materialist, Jewish atheist grandson of a communist who he says helped defeat Hitler. Okay. An American communist who helped defeat Hitler. And he thinks that this is actually like good for him and his reputation. He comes from good stock or whatever. He went to Brown University. Okay. Brown's as liberal as they come and as elitist as they come. So I think that Curtis Yarvin is very much a product of all of that. And the fact that Peter Thiel and JD Vance and others gravitate toward his philosophy and his image of the future, I think should be very concerning. Okay. Because even if you want to go so far as to call these people right wing or on the right in any way whatsoever, you still can't, by doing that, eliminate the elitism. And the elitism is part of the picture of that image of the future. And it can't be detached. And so, again, I would say in response to EC's comment there, that I think Curtis Yarvin totally understands the existence of the aristocracy. It's also worth mentioning before we wrap this up that the Senate was initially devised as a body to represent the aristocracy. Okay. The Democratic body, quote unquote, little d, would be the House of Representatives. Okay. Those would be the direct representatives of the people en masse. And then the Senate would be the deliberative body to make sure that what the people wanted could be married to the needs of the powered and moneyed and landed elite, the aristocracy. And you could say, well, they shouldn't have a say. It should just be everybody. Well, that's not actually true. Okay. Because people with more power and more ability to wield power, more influence on society, the people whose societies rely upon, are going to have to get their way about certain things if the society is going to keep chugging forward as we want it to be, right? We can't just abolish the energy companies, for instance, right? and to take people without any experience in the field and just throw them in front of the energy company to the extent we need it, just nationalize it, throw some average Joe in front of it and expect that it's still going to work the same. Okay, that's not how the world works. So it has to be taken into account. The power, the money, the elites, that has to be taken into account. The property owners, I should have also mentioned. And so we had a system to do that. And then we eliminated that system because we said our society's a democracy. The people get to vote for absolutely everything. Well, if you let the people vote for everything, then the system as designed can't function as designed because it was designed and agreed to so that it would function that way and not this way. And we can see that it doesn't function now. So, I think that the aristocracy on some level is going to be taken into account no matter what governmental form we exist in. And it's worth remembering that the people who put our Constitution in place originally, many of them were the landed aristocracy and powerful people in the military, right? So the high-level enemy that we concern ourselves with, like everything else, is also good twin, evil twin, which is why it's important to discern that distinction, especially so when we're talking about the most powerful people in societies. Not all of them are bad, though. And not all of them want things that are antithetical to the wants and needs of the people generally.